Hello family, welcome to Stories by Tocci. We bring you interesting folk tales. Please subscribe and drop a like for us. This generosity would go a long way for us. Also share to family and friends. And please turn on post notification to stay tuned for more. Thank you as you do so. Now let's get into the story. Cynthia never imagined the day would come when silence would be more dangerous than shouting. The silence between her and Kelechi, her then boyfriend, had become thick enough to cut with a knife. It wasn't the type of silence that came after understanding or tiredness. No, it was heavy like wet wool on bare skin. The kind that pressed into the bones and made breathing feel like effort. Kelechi had changed. Or maybe she had. Either way, what began as passion quickly turned into poison. He started small, mocking the way she talked, dismissing her tailoring work as something to keep you busy. At first, Cynthia brushed it off with nervous laughter. But over time, the laughter dried up. He criticized her cooking, her friends, her family, even the way she walked. When her mother warned her, "My daughter, this boy's tongue is a whip in disguise," she didn't listen. Love, she believed, was supposed to be difficult. What she didn't know then was that love wasn't supposed to bruise the heart. He was the kind of man whose anger came unannounced, like harmattan dust, settling everywhere and choking the peace from the room. Their arguments were storms, loud, unpredictable, leaving wreckage behind. Neighbors often turned on their lights at night when Kelechi shouted. One even knocked once, asking if she was safe. That night Kelechi laughed and said, "She's just dramatic." But Cynthia wasn't dramatic. She was drowning in a relationship that made her doubt the reflection in her own mirror. She stopped inviting friends over, stopped attending church programs, and stopped sharing anything with her mother because she didn't want to hear the truth. But the truth had its own way of showing up, in her sleepless nights, her thinning cheeks, and the dullness that crept into her once bright eyes. There was one night, long before she walked away, that still haunted her. Kelechi had come back late, smelling of cheap beer and something else she didn't dare name. His eyes were red, not from tiredness, but from whatever demons he'd entertained. He accused her of flirting with a customer, threw her phone against the wall, and told her she was lucky he hadn't met her earlier in life. She remembered standing there, barefoot on the cold tiles, watching the pieces of her phone scatter like her hopes. The next morning, he acted like nothing happened, kissed her forehead and asked her to make yam porridge. And like a fool in love, she cooked. That was the pattern: destroy and deny, hurt and hug, control and call it care. But something inside Cynthia began to shift. It wasn't a loud change. It was quiet, like a door closing in a distant room. She stopped replying to his insults. Not out of peace, but because she was conserving her energy. She had started saving small money from each tailoring job, hiding the naira notes inside an old biscuit tin. She didn't tell anyone. Not even her sister, Amanda, who once caught her crying in the bathroom and said, "Sis, this man will bury you while you're still breathing if you don't leave." Cynthia just smiled weakly and changed the subject. It was never easy to walk away from someone who had once made your heart dance. But it's even harder to stay with someone who steps on your joy and calls it love. The day finally came, and not with thunder or shouting. It was a Tuesday. Kelechi had called her useless over a delay in dinner. She looked at him, really looked, and saw not a man, but a mirror reflecting her worst fears. That night, after he slept, she packed her bag, wore her flat sandals and left. Life after Kelechi was not immediately peaceful. Freedom, Cynthia realized, comes with echoes. The first week felt like stepping into sunlight after too long in a dark room. It burned her eyes. She stayed with her cousin in GRA, Benin City, sewing clothes for neighbors while trying to rebuild her routine. People around her thought she should be dancing with joy, but Cynthia knew better. Healing is not a festival. It's more like peeling burnt skin, painful, necessary, and slow. Her body was free, but her mind was still inside arguments, still flinching at loud footsteps, still expecting insults after asking harmless questions. Some nights she would wake up panicked, thinking she forgot to make rice, only to remember she no longer had to. She deleted Kelechi's number, but didn't block it. A small, broken part of her wanted him to call. He never did. Instead, it was peace that called slowly at first, then louder, like waves that keep returning to shore no matter how many times you push them away. Cynthia began walking in the evenings, not far, just down the dusty road lined with almond trees. She greeted old women by the roadside, bought oranges from the boy with a cracked tooth, and watched the clouds roll over the city like theater curtains. She started journaling, writing things like, "I am not what he said I am," and I deserve softness. Her tailoring improved. Her hands, once used to trembling under criticism, now moved like water over fabric. She stitched more than clothes, she stitched fragments of herself back together. The broken mirror was gone. In its place stood a woman who didn't yet know where she was going, but knew she wasn't going back. Then came the night that changed everything, not in the dramatic way movies often show, but in a way that only real life understands. Cynthia had just finished ironing a lace blouse when she received a Facebook friend request. At first, she ignored it. The profile picture was of a man holding a baby, smiling in a way that didn't look forced. He didn't look like someone who used love as a weapon. But appearances are often the first mask. The next morning, curiosity nudged her like a playful sibling. She clicked on the profile. His name was Richard Johnson. No mutual friends. Odd. But something about his bio, single father. Trying again. Felt too personal to ignore. He sent her a message. Hi Cynthia. I hope you don't mind me reaching out. You seem like someone who understands quiet strength. It was the strangest thing. No emojis. No hi dear, or you look sweet. Just something human. She didn't reply that day. Or the next. But on the third day, after finishing her delivery to a bride-to-be, she found herself opening his message. She typed, hello. I'm curious, what made you message me? He responded within minutes. Because you look like you've loved deeply. And lost. And survived. Cynthia stared at the words for a long time. It wasn't love at first sight, far from it. It was more like standing at the edge of a river, knowing you might drown again, but also knowing the shore you left no longer exists. That night, she fell asleep not with a smile, but with a question. What if this time, love didn't come to break her? Cynthia didn't respond to Richard again until 3 days later, after an unusually slow day at her shop. Rain had fallen steadily since morning, soaking the red earth outside and painting the gutters in brown. The air was thick with the smell of damp fabric and kerosene smoke. She was seated on a low wooden stool, picking stitches from a spoiled sleeve, when her phone buzzed. It was a message from him again. Not flirtatious, not urgent, just quiet, like a knock from a polite stranger at your door. Hope you're having a good day. Rainy over here too. I just wanted to check in. That was it. No emojis. No long speeches. Something about the simplicity disarmed her. She typed back a short reply, something safe. And that was how it started. One message turned into 2. Then 5. Then, by the end of the week, they were exchanging full conversations, mostly in the evening when Cynthia closed her shop and boiled yam for dinner. Richard said he lived in Warri, temporarily staying with his elder sister after moving out from his ex's place. He had a son, 6 years old, who stayed with his grandmother for now because he didn't want the child growing up around arguments. I've seen what bitterness does to people, he wrote once. I don't want to become one of those men who turn into monsters because someone broke their heart. His vulnerability made Cynthia pause. She had heard similar words before, but there was something different about the way he said it, not performative, not seeking pity. It sounded like a man who had cracked open and simply wanted someone to see the inside. Still, she tread carefully, replying slowly, always double-checking her words. Her heart wasn't healed, just quieter. Trust, she had learned, was not something you hand out like flyers. The first phone call came on a Sunday evening, while she was trimming net for a bride's veil. She let it ring twice before answering. His voice was deeper than she imagined, with a calmness that didn't try too hard. I hope I'm not disturbing, he said, and even though her hands trembled slightly, she replied, No, it's fine. I was just working. Their conversation was short, just 15 minutes. But it was enough to plant something soft in her chest, like a seed pressing its way through soil. Over the next 3 weeks, calls became a part of her evening ritual. She would light the small mosquito coil in the corner of her room, tie her wrapper, and lie on her side, phone pressed to her ear, listening to Richard talk about his day. He spoke of normal things, his sister's loud laughter, the way his son pronounced spaghetti as paschetti, the challenges of trying to restart a cleaning business in Warri. He never asked about her past. He didn't push her to open old wounds. He only asked once, during a particularly quiet night, What makes you feel most at peace? Cynthia paused. No one had ever asked her that before. Peace, she repeated, almost unsure of the word. Maybe folding clothes just after ironing them, or when I finish a difficult stitching job and it fits the customer perfectly. That kind of silence. That's peace. Richard didn't speak for a moment, then said softly, I hope I can bring that kind of silence into your life. It wasn't a grand declaration. There was no violin playing in the background. Just a man on the other end of the line, who didn't sound like he wanted to own her, just sit beside her in whatever quietness she allowed. Eventually, he told her he would be coming to Asaba, not just for work, but to meet her, finally face to face. Cynthia felt something between excitement and fear. She hadn't seen him beyond the occasional pictures he posted, one with his son at a children's park, one where he wore a plain blue t-shirt, smiling without showing teeth. She told Amanda, her younger sister, about the visit, and Amanda, as always, was suspicious. Hope you've checked him well. No be every man way day quote soft words for chat day soft for real life. Cynthia nodded. She had done her checks. No red flags. No suspicious female comments under his posts. No hidden wives. The day he arrived, she wore a simple blue gown, ironed to perfection, and left her hair in a neat bun. She didn't tell her mother where she was going, just said she had a delivery to make. The hotel wasn't far from the main market, modest but clean. Richard was already at the reception when she arrived, dressed casually in jeans and a white shirt. He wasn't movie star handsome, but he looked exactly like his pictures, tired in the eyes but steady on his feet. When he saw her, he smiled, not the wide kind, but the kind that builds at the corners of the mouth and says more than words. "You look like yourself," he said. "I was afraid you'd be different in person." Cynthia laughed quietly, feeling the tension drop from her shoulders. "You too," she replied, and meant it. They didn't rush the meeting. No overfamiliar touches. Just a long conversation in the hotel lounge over small chops and fruit juice. But when she left that evening, something inside her shifted. He had given her no reason to doubt. Not yet. Their second meeting came 2 days later. He had extended his stay by a few more nights, saying the work that brought him to town was still ongoing. Cynthia found herself looking forward to the time they spent together. This time, they met in his room, a tidy, medium-sized space with soft lighting and the faint scent of cinnamon air freshener. She had brought him akara wrapped in newspaper and cold zobo in a reused juice bottle. He thanked her like she had brought gold. They sat on the bed, talking about life in their 20s, the mistakes, the things they wished they had done differently. Richard told her more about his son, how he sometimes cried for his mother at night, even though she had left without a backward glance. "I don't want him to grow up thinking women can't be trusted," he said, looking at the ceiling as if the answer was written there. Cynthia placed her hand on his for the first time. It was a small gesture, but for both of them, it felt like opening a door. That evening, they had their first kiss. It wasn't hurried or hungry. It felt like something that had waited for permission. The kiss led to more, not because it was expected, but because it felt natural. Afterward, they lay beside each other, fully clothed, saying nothing. Sometimes silence says the most. Cynthia didn't sleep over, but when she stepped outside into the cool Asaba night, her heart was strangely still. Not restless. Not running. Just still. She walked home slowly, listening to the sound of her own footsteps on the pavement. It had been a long time since her heart hadn't screamed warnings. For once, it was whispering something different. Maybe, just maybe, this one would be gentle. Cynthia's days gradually began to take on a different texture, as if someone had replaced the thread in her life's fabric with something softer. She still ran her small tailoring shop in the heart of Asaba, still ironed each fabric twice before folding it, still offered her clients a cold sachet of water when the sun got too intense. But now there was a quiet excitement that lingered at the edges of everything, a sense of waiting, of possibility. Richard had returned to Warri after a week-long stay, promising to come again soon. He called her every night, like clockwork, and she found herself rearranging her schedule just to be done with everything before his call. It became a ritual, a sacred time marked not by grand speeches or romantic declarations, but by simple, grounding conversations. They would talk about what they ate, the funny things his son said over the phone, the customers that frustrated her, and random things like which jollof was better, Ghanaian or Nigerian. Cynthia, who had once grown used to conversations that felt like battles, was now experiencing something different, something that felt like ease. But even in this newfound rhythm, there were moments of hesitation. Sometimes she would catch herself staring at her reflection, wondering if she was repeating the same mistake again, rushing into something simply because it felt better than what came before. At other times, she questioned whether Richard was showing her a carefully arranged version of himself, the way actors rehearse for roles. But each time doubt crept in, something about the sincerity in his voice pulled her back. And so she let herself lean, not fully, not carelessly, but enough to feel the warmth of connection. There were signs she chose to overlook, subtle things that whispered instead of shouted, but they were there. Once, during a phone conversation, Cynthia had mentioned she needed to fix her generator. Business was slow, and the light situation had been worse than usual. Richard responded with silence for a few seconds before saying, "Things are tough everywhere, babe. Even me, I'm barely holding it together." She hadn't asked for money, not directly, but something about his tone made her feel as though she had. So she quickly changed the topic, laughing it off and talking about a troublesome client who wanted Ankara sleeves on lace fabric. Another time, when she had asked if he could send a small token for her sister Amanda's school textbook, he snapped almost instantly, saying, "So now I'm your family's provider too?" That statement stung, not because she needed his money, but because of how quickly he shifted from sweetness to suspicion. Cynthia started to walk on eggshells without realizing it. She filtered her words before speaking, measured her requests like a debtor facing a stingy lender. It didn't take long before she stopped asking for anything at all. Instead, she became the giver. She began buying him small things, a branded wristwatch she saw on discount, a pair of sandals from a roadside stall, a bar of his favorite soap she had noticed in his hotel bathroom. He would thank her with brief words, never over the top, never unkind, just short acknowledgments like someone trying not to owe too much. Cynthia told herself she was doing it from a place of love. After all, she had once dated a man who never let her give. But somewhere in the back of her mind, a question hung like a painting on a crooked nail. How much giving is too much when you're not getting anything in return? It was Amanda who noticed the change in her sister first. One night, while they were eating yam and pepper sauce, she asked, "Is this new guy making you happy or making you tired?" Cynthia smiled and said nothing. But that question lingered long after dinner, echoing in her head as she lay on her mattress, the ceiling fan humming above like a distant reminder of all the things she refused to see. That week, something shifted again. Cynthia decided to test the waters, not out of spite, but from a strange desire to feel chosen, to be prioritized the way she had begun to prioritize him. She told Richard that her ex, Kelechi, had randomly sent her money for no reason. "Just a token," she said with a playful laugh. "Maybe guilt money." What she expected was a little jealousy, maybe concern, or even a joke. What she got instead was an explosion. "So you're still collecting money from your ex?" he barked over the phone. "You women are all the same, just looking for where to cash out." Cynthia tried to explain it was just a test, a harmless one at that, but Richard wasn't listening. He said she had betrayed his trust, accused her of emotional manipulation, and for the first time since they met, he raised his voice in a way that rattled her. "You think I'm a fool? You're playing me like the last idiot who fell for your tears." The line went dead shortly after. She tried calling back, but he didn't pick. She left messages, apologetic, regretful, anxious, but he read them and never replied. That was the first night since they met that he didn't call. Cynthia lay awake, heart thudding like footsteps in an empty hallway, wondering if she had just broken something that was never truly hers to begin with. Days turned into a week, and the silence between them stretched like a rope pulled too tight. When he finally responded, it was with a coldness that left frost on her skin. "I just need space," he said. "Too many things on my mind." He didn't say he forgave her. He didn't say they were fine. Cynthia apologized again, saying it was a stupid joke, something born from insecurity. But Richard was no longer the soft-voiced man who once said he wanted to bring her peace. He had become distant, measured, clipped, guarded. And so she shrunk. She began to do more, sent him care packages, made voice notes singing softly, even transferred airtime without being asked. She had become a gardener watering a flower that had already started wilting, refusing to see the browning leaves. One afternoon, while scrolling through his Facebook page, something she had never done thoroughly before, she saw a photo that stopped her breath. Richard, arm around a woman's waist, smiling in a way he never smiled with her. The caption read, "Grateful for real ones." The post was 3 days old. She clicked on the woman's profile. More pictures. Comments that hinted at familiarity. Not just one woman. There were others too, scattered across different posts, different cities. All beautiful. All smiling. Her heart sank like a stone tossed into a river. When she confronted him, his response was so brutally casual it made her doubt she had ever known him. "I lost feelings for you a while ago. I just didn't want to hurt you. But now that you've started playing mind games, I think it's best we go our separate ways." No argument. No begging. Just dismissal. Cynthia ended the call and stared at the wall for a long time. That night, she didn't cry. She just sat, holding her knees like a child who had seen something too dark too soon. The silence this time wasn't soft. It was sharp, the kind that cuts without leaving blood. Cynthia moved through the days as though someone had removed color from her world. The streets of Asaba felt quieter, though she knew they hadn't changed. Her shop was still where she left it, tucked beside the woman who sold second-hand shoes and the kiosk boy who shouted, "Come buy cold malt," every morning. But now, even the familiar things felt foreign. Her customers still came, still joked, still left with their well-sewn fabrics, but Cynthia stopped seeing their faces. She would smile, nod, measure, and stitch, but her thoughts were elsewhere, playing loops of things she wished she hadn't ignored. There was a dull ache in her chest that didn't scream, but it lingered like hunger, the kind that doesn't just want food but warmth, care, understanding. After Richard cut things off, she didn't delete his number. She thought about it often but didn't. Maybe she was waiting. Not for reconciliation, but for something that felt like closure. That closure never came. He vanished as if he had never existed, and the silence he left behind was louder than any insult he could have thrown. What hurt most wasn't the betrayal. It was the realization that she had loved someone who only saw her as a resting place, not a destination. And in trying to prove she was different from the women who hurt him, she forgot to protect the parts of herself that were still healing. Amanda tried asking her about it once, but Cynthia waved her off, claiming she was just tired. But the tiredness didn't leave. It followed her to bed, curled beside her like a restless ghost, whispering doubts into her ears. Had she been foolish? Had she ignored what was right in front of her? And more importantly, would she ever feel safe with anyone again? She didn't rush into another relationship after Richard. For the first time in years, she chose stillness. The kind of stillness that doesn't come from giving up, but from retreating to understand oneself again. She began waking up early, not because she had customers, but because she enjoyed watching the light slip through her curtain and paint shadows on the walls. She made tea with ginger and honey, and drank it slowly, letting the warmth crawl down her throat like reassurance. She also stopped checking Richard's social media. The temptation had been strong in the beginning, that aching need to know if he missed her, if he regretted anything, if she had mattered even a little. But after a while, she stopped craving that pain. What would knowing do? Nothing. She had already seen enough. So she started choosing herself again, piece by piece. She read old books she had abandoned. She cleaned out her wardrobe and donated clothes she no longer liked. She even took down the photo of her and Richard, not because it made her angry, but because she no longer recognized the woman in it. That version of herself had been trying too hard to earn what should have been given freely. One Sunday afternoon, as she was sweeping the shop, a man walked in, tall, brown-skinned, with calm eyes and a slow smile. He introduced himself as Daniel. He said he had just moved into the neighborhood for a contract job with a construction company and needed to adjust some trousers for work. Cynthia nodded and told him to come back in 3 days. He thanked her and left. It was nothing really, just a man needing tailoring. But there was something about the way he spoke, not in words, but in pauses, in how he waited after she answered, in how he didn't let his eyes wander. Respect isn't loud, and Daniel's was the quiet kind. He returned exactly 3 days later, just as she had instructed. His punctuality surprised her. Most customers in Asaba ran on their own time, appearing hours or even days late, always armed with excuses. But Daniel showed up with a folded smile and the receipt still tucked in his back pocket. She handed him the trousers, and he tried them on behind the small curtain in the corner. When he stepped out, he gave a small nod of approval. "Perfect," he said. "You have magic in your hands." Cynthia smiled, but not the way she once smiled with Richard. This smile was polite, careful, still wrapped in caution. Daniel thanked her and said he'd recommend her to his colleagues. That was all. No flirty comments. No unnecessary questions. He left as calmly as he came. But from that day, he became a regular visitor. At first, it was always about clothes, a shirt here, a pair of chinos there. But eventually, the conversations started to linger. He would come in even when he had nothing to sew, just to sit and talk. They spoke about things that didn't feel heavy. She learned he was half Nigerian, half Ghanaian, and had lived in both Accra and Abuja. He loved plantain, hated pepper soup, and once tried tailoring in secondary school, but gave up after pricking his finger 3 times. Cynthia listened, laughed once or twice, and slowly allowed herself to enjoy the company. Not because she was looking for another love story, but because it felt good to be seen without being studied, to be heard without being tested. Daniel never pried. He didn't ask about her past, didn't fish for wounds he could mend. He simply existed beside her, like sunlight coming through a window, not asking to be noticed but bringing warmth anyway. Weeks passed, and his visits became more frequent. Sometimes he brought lunch. Other times, just himself. One evening, he brought akra from a roadside vendor and cold zobo in a reused bottle. "I figured tailors forget to eat," he said. It reminded her too much of Richard, the zobo, the simple gestures, and for a moment, a knot tightened in her chest. But Daniel didn't press. He saw her expression and gently changed the topic to something silly, something light. That was when she realized he wasn't trying to replace anyone. He was just there, showing up in his own way. One day, after a long conversation about how difficult it was to find genuine people in cities like Lagos and Port Harcourt, Daniel paused and looked at her. "You don't have to answer," he said. "But you've been hurt, haven't you?" Cynthia blinked, unsure how to respond. She looked away, pretending to smooth the edge of a fabric that didn't need smoothing. "I've loved wrongly," she finally said. He didn't nod or ask who. He just said, "So have I." And that was it. No probing. Just understanding. That evening, she didn't feel exposed. She felt safe. Not because Daniel promised her forever or spoke in poetic lines, but because he made room for her silence. He didn't need to fill every gap with conversation. And in that silence, Cynthia began to feel something she hadn't felt in a long time. Not love, not yet, but hope, and that was more than enough. Cynthia didn't know the exact moment Daniel became a permanent part of her day, but one morning, while peeling yam in the kitchen, she found herself wondering if he had eaten. It was the kind of thought that crept in without permission, the way music from a neighbor's radio seeps through the walls uninvited, but not unwelcome. It wasn't romantic, at least not in the way people imagined it. It wasn't fireworks or stolen glances or butterflies in her stomach. It was a quiet kind of noticing, like realizing the rain had stopped only when you heard the silence. He had never called her baby or made promises. He didn't flood her phone with messages, and he never asked for anything she wasn't willing to give. But he showed up. Every time. When the local tailors' union increased levy fees and Cynthia was furious, he sat on a plastic chair beside her while she ranted, nodding and offering reasonable suggestions. When her sewing machine started acting up, he came by after work to check it, even though he knew nothing about tailoring machines. He just sat with her, tools in hand, poking around and joking that he was born to be useless in technical things. It wasn't about fixing the machine. It was about showing up. And in a world where people often promised heaven and delivered confusion, showing up had become the rarest love language. She didn't tell Amanda about the feelings that were beginning to form. Not yet, because even Cynthia herself wasn't sure what those feelings were. All she knew was that she didn't feel the need to pretend around Daniel. And after everything she had survived, that kind of ease was worth more than 1,000 poetic messages or flowers delivered to her doorstep. There was a weekend in mid-May that became a turning point in ways Cynthia didn't immediately realize. The city had just recovered from 3 days of rain, and the air was fresher than usual, the kind that made you want to take long walks for no reason. She had just finished mopping her room when Daniel called and asked if she was free for lunch. He didn't say anything fancy, just, "Let's eat something small. You've been working too hard." She met him at a quiet buka behind St. Monica's church, a place she hadn't visited in months. The food was hot, spicy, and satisfying, and they ate under a zinc roof that creaked whenever the breeze passed through. Halfway through the meal, Daniel looked up from his plate of jollof rice and asked, "Do you ever wonder if pain changes your taste in people?" The question caught her off guard. Cynthia wiped her hands with a tissue and thought for a moment before answering. "It changes your eyes first. Then it changes your ears. And finally, your heart becomes more careful about where it rests." He nodded slowly, like someone absorbing more than just her words. They talked for over an hour about things that mattered: family, childhood dreams, the weight of loneliness even when surrounded by people. Daniel spoke about his father's silence growing up, how he learned to become a man from watching the mistakes his uncles made. Cynthia shared memories of her father, now late, and how he once told her that being kind was the most rebellious thing anyone could be in a world that rewarded cruelty. When they left the buka, they walked without destination. Daniel didn't hold her hand, and she didn't expect him to. But they moved in sync, the way people do when they've found an unspoken rhythm. That night, while folding her clothes, she caught herself smiling. Not because of something Daniel said, but because of how he made her feel, seen, not studied, cared for, not consumed. Amanda noticed the shift before Cynthia said anything. She saw it in how Cynthia began humming again while ironing, how she no longer stared blankly at the wall when her phone buzzed, how she cleaned her room without needing to be asked. One evening, as they sat outside cracking groundnuts, Amanda finally said, "So, are you going to tell me, or should I keep pretending I don't see what's going on?" Cynthia laughed, really laughed, and it surprised her how easily it came. She admitted that something was growing between her and Daniel, but she wasn't rushing into anything. Amanda, ever the cautious one, asked all the necessary questions. Has he asked for money? Does he have children hiding in another state? Has he mentioned any woman named Gloria, Joy, or Blessing? They both laughed at that, but the conversation grew serious soon after. Amanda reminded her that not all good beginnings end well. Cynthia agreed, but she also said something she hadn't said in years. "I'm not looking for perfection this time. I just want something honest. Something that doesn't change shape when I stop smiling." Amanda didn't argue. She only nodded and said, "Just be sure you're choosing him, not healing through him." That night, Cynthia sat on the floor of her room, legs crossed, sewing a dress she had been avoiding for weeks. Her fingers moved with ease, but her mind wandered. She thought of Richard for a moment, not with anger, but with the quiet acceptance that some people come into your life only to teach you how to leave when you're not being loved properly. And in that acceptance, she began to realize that she wasn't building a new life to replace the old. She was simply learning how to live again, with care, with softness, and most of all, without fear. One afternoon, while they sat under the mango tree behind her shop, Daniel finally asked the question she didn't know she was waiting to hear. "Do you want to start something real with me, Cynthia?" His voice wasn't demanding. There was no pressure. He asked it the same way someone might ask if you wanted more stew, gently, with the freedom to say no. Cynthia looked at him, studying the lines on his face, the small scar under his chin, the way his eyes didn't flinch when he spoke. She thought about all the times she had said yes out of fear of being alone. This time was different. She wasn't saying yes because she needed saving. She wasn't saying yes because she was tired of loneliness. She was saying yes because he made room for her silence, because he didn't shrink her when she was unsure, because he came without the noise of promises but stayed with the weight of presence. "Yes," she said finally, "but slowly. I don't want to lose myself in love again." He nodded. "Then we'll take our time." And so they did. Their story didn't unfold like a fairy tale. It didn't require declarations shouted from rooftops or matching clothes for Instagram. It was simple, two people who had been bruised in different corners of life, slowly learning that sometimes love doesn't knock down walls. Sometimes it just sits quietly beside you, waiting for you to open the door. Cynthia wasn't sure where the road would lead. But for the first time in a long while, she wasn't afraid to find out. And that courage, that small bloom of hope, was more than she ever thought she'd feel again. The days passed like whispers, neither loud nor fast, but consistent, like the ticking of an old clock in a quiet house. Cynthia found herself adjusting to the unfamiliar calm that Daniel brought with him. Not calm as in boring, but the kind that made her body unclench in his presence. She didn't have to constantly measure her words or prepare for mood swings disguised as passion. The relationship was not perfect, but it didn't pretend to be. Daniel had his own silences, days when work wore him thin, or when he stared too long at his phone, lost in thought, but he always returned. He never used her past against her, never demanded access to things she wasn't ready to share. And when she did speak, when fragments of old heartbreak surfaced, he listened like a man digging gently through broken glass, trying not to worsen the wounds. Cynthia, in turn, allowed herself to be vulnerable slowly. It wasn't easy. There were days when she'd catch herself expecting him to turn cold, waiting for the shoe to drop, for his kindness to be revealed as a trap. But nothing came. No insults. No vanishing acts. Just presence. Steady like evening rain. She began to feel safe again, not because someone promised her safety, but because someone lived it. He didn't say, "Trust me." He simply behaved in ways that invited it. She returned to singing while sewing, humming old church tunes that she hadn't thought of in years. Her laughter returned, not the forced kind that follows polite jokes, but the type that bubbles out unexpectedly and lingers in the room long after it falls silent. Their first argument came over something trivial, as most arguments do. Daniel had arrived late for their dinner at a roadside suya spot, and Cynthia, already tired from a difficult day at the shop, let her frustration slip through her tone. "You said 6. It's almost 7:30, she muttered, arms folded across her chest, trying to hold back the wave of emotion that came too quickly. He apologized immediately, explained that a site inspection ran over time, but her mood was already set. They sat in uncomfortable silence, the meat on their tray untouched. Then, unlike Richard or even Kelechi before him, Daniel did something simple and unexpected. He asked her what was really wrong. Not defensively, not to win an argument, but to understand. She surprised herself by responding honestly. I think I'm still afraid. Sometimes I feel like I'm not worth showing up for. Like I'm always one mistake away from being left again. Daniel didn't offer cliches or romantic reassurances. He simply reached for her hand and said, I can't erase what others did, but I can show you something different if you let me. That moment stayed with her for days. It wasn't grand. It wasn't loud. But it felt like a hinge in her story, the kind that turns the door just slightly enough to let light in. After that night, they talked more openly. They disagreed sometimes, about how much time to spend together, about whether it was too soon to meet his family, but they never fought to win. They argued to understand. And for Cynthia, that alone was revolutionary. She had spent so much of her life managing other people's emotions, hiding parts of herself to stay desirable. With Daniel, she was learning how to be whole and still be loved. One morning, months after they had made their relationship official, Cynthia woke up to find her mother waiting in the parlor, wrapper tied tightly over her chest, face unreadable. He came to see me, her mother said, voice steady. The one you've been smiling about. Cynthia blinked. Daniel. Her mother nodded. He brought yam, and oil, and malt. Sat down and said he's not rushing you, but he wanted to introduce himself properly. Said he's not here to scatter your peace. Cynthia sat down slowly, overwhelmed. She hadn't known Daniel planned to visit. She hadn't even mentioned the idea. But he had gone, on his own, without prompting, without fanfare. Her mother, who was not easily impressed, said only this. I've seen many come and go. This one, his eyes are calm. Like someone who knows what he wants but doesn't shout about it. That day, Cynthia couldn't concentrate at the shop. Her hands moved, but her mind was elsewhere. Not just because Daniel had met her mother, but because for the first time in a very long time, the future didn't feel like a hallway filled with locked doors. It felt like an open field, wide and unhurried. She didn't dream of a wedding or children or big declarations. She simply dreamt of a life where peace wasn't a visitor but a resident. A life where she could sit beside someone and not feel like she was performing. A life where she could finally breathe without checking if someone else had inhaled first. On a quiet evening, as the harmattan wind began to whisper promises of the year's end, Cynthia sat outside her shop, watching the sky change color. Daniel arrived, holding a small parcel wrapped in brown paper. For your birthday, he said. She had forgotten. Or maybe she had trained herself not to expect celebration. Inside the parcel was a notebook, handmade, bound in soft leather, with her name carved into the cover. Inside, the pages were blank. To write the parts of your story that are yours alone, he said. She stared at the gift for a long time before nodding, too moved to speak. That night, she began to write. Not about Kelechi, or Richard, or even Daniel. She wrote about herself. The girl who once mistook pain for passion. The woman who forgot her worth in the arms of someone who only wanted her obedience. And now, the person she was becoming, quiet, certain, not perfect, but present. She knew there would be challenges. Life didn't promise safety, only chances. But she also knew that healing wasn't a straight line. It was a slow dance, with steps forward and steps back, and someone to hold you steady when the rhythm changed. Beneath the smile she wore now wasn't sorrow, or bitterness, or even survival. It was strength. It was softness earned through fire. And most importantly, it was her own. For the first time, Cynthia didn't need anyone to tell her she had grown. She could feel it, like the weight of a story finally told. Not for others to pity or praise, but for herself, to remember that she didn't just make it through. She made it whole. Dear listener, if this story touched something deep in you, know this. You are not weak for loving deeply. You are not foolish for believing the best in people. But wisdom is learning when to hold on, and when to let go. Love should never leave you empty. Don't shrink yourself just to be enough for someone who's not ready. The right person will not dim your light, they will protect it. Heal slowly. Love gently. And when peace comes, don't question it. You deserve it. May your heart never again settle in places that bruise it. May the love you give return to you in peace, not pain. May your silence be filled with answers, not loneliness. May your days be full of gentle people, kind words, and real laughter. May your healing be complete, Not halfway, not conditional, but full and overflowing. And when love comes again, may it find you stronger, softer, and shining in your truth. Amen, somebody. Let me hear you say, Amen. Hope you enjoyed this interesting story. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Turn on post notifications. See you on our next story.